All right. Hi, welcome everyone. This is the Columbus State Community College Sustainability Group with Factory Farming Awareness Coalition. We have Cassidy, Thompson here. They go by any pronouns. They're a part of the group as well and part of the Factory Farming Awareness Coalition. We also have Mikhala, I'm so sorry, Kaseweter? I hope I said that right.
Kaseweter, it's fine.
I'm so sorry. And they go by she, her, or they pronouns, and they're with Greener by default. And they are going to go ahead and give us a presentation about factory farming and plant-based foods. So I can hand it off to you with your presentation. And then we will do questions. We'll be monitoring them. That way we can tell you about them.
Awesome. I'll go ahead and share my screen if that's all right.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, let me put this in presenter view. Oh wait, these notes are old actually. I don't want to mess this up. I'm just going to do it this way. I'm sorry.
No worries.
I don't want to mess it up. Yeah. Hi all, thank you so much for having me. My name is Cassidy. I'm an art major and animal liberationist, and I'm with Factory Farming Awareness, a coalition. We are a nonprofit that talks to people about the impacts of industrialized animal agriculture, otherwise known as factory farming. Animal agriculture is one of the single most environmentally destructive industries on the planet. This might come as a surprise. How could old McDonald be so bad? I'm going to walk you through it today. On the left is a typical factory farm ad, and on the right is a typical factory farm. What differences stand out to you? You can type them in the chat or you can say them out loud on the mic, whichever you're more comfortable with.
I could start. I definitely see that the butter on the left-hand side, it feels more, outdoors, like Jen said, just like it feels free and like they're wandering around, compared to the right, where unfortunately they don't have much room to themselves or personal space or anything like that.
Right, definitely. So that's right. If they had the image on the right, they would definitely sell less of it. This is called marketing and is arguably a form of deception. Factory farms have one goal and one goal only, and that is to make money. They may say they care about their animals or their workers or the environment, but actions speak louder than words. And the actions of factory farms prove over and over again that they only care about money. And as you notice, intensive confinement is a typical factory farm trope. Also, what do you see in common with these photos? I'll give you a couple seconds to discuss, and again, you can say out loud or you can put it in the chat. And I might call on people if no one speaks up. Were you going to say something, Hannah?
I also was going to tell, I'm just watching the chat as well, and I think they can raise their hand as well.
Oh,
Julia
I'm sorry, I should open the chat, yeah.
Oh, no, you're fine. I see Julia said overcrowding, and that's for sure.
Yes, overcrowding, definitely. Intensive confinement is the standard in modern factory farming. The places where we breed tens or even hundreds of thousands of animals in closed confinement is formally called a concentrated animal feeding operation, or CAFO. How did we end up with this system of factory farming? Why not just have small farms? The answer is our demand for meat, dairy, and eggs far exceeds the land available to raise animals in a more natural way. Sorry, this slide's not going to work the right way. There are, every year in the US alone, more than 10 billion land animals are raised and killed for meat, eggs, and milk. There are more farmed animals in the US alone than there are people on the entire planet. To put it into perspective, that's 285 animals killed every second for food. And again, I apologize, the slide's not going to work correctly. So of these 10 billion animals raised in the US, 99% are raised on factory farms. So pretty much any meat you see in a restaurant or at the grocery store is going to be from a factory farm. And which animals are we eating the most? Well, that's going to be chickens, and that's because they are much smaller than compared to a cow or a pig. So people will eat more of them. And then for special products with specific labels like organic or free range, I'll explain those. For example, this is a picture of a free range egg farm. It's true these hens aren't in cages, but this isn't exactly what we imagine when we see cage-free or free range and see those happy-looking chickens on the cover of the carton. Chickens in these facilities still live in industrial sheds by the thousands, which contributes to all the same environmental problems. For every 100 calories a cow eats, you only get 3 back when you eat her. What happens to the other 97 calories? She burns them to live just like we do. She has to use the calories to grow fur, teeth, eyes, hooves, digest her food, keep her body warm, and her heart beating. So instead of consuming those 100 calories ourselves, we're feeding them to animals. That means we're wasting lots of land, energy, and food. In fact, 83% of the farmland in this world produces only 18% of the calories we consume. Why? Because most of the food we grow is fed to animals, and animals are a really inefficient source of food. A recent study actually found that if everyone in the world ate half as much meat and we used all that farmland to grow fruits, vegetables, and legumes to feed directly to people, rather than growing corn and soy to feed to animals and factory farms, we could feed every single person on Earth today, plus a potential extra 2 billion people. There's a lot of talk about how we're going to feed the growing global population. And a critical part of the answer is eating more efficiently by eating lower on the food chain. All of this animal feed requires huge amounts of land. It's a leading cause of deforestation in the Amazon. You might have seen the articles about the terrible fires destroying the Amazon across Brazil. Most of these fires were started by farmers and ranchers who want to clear the land to graze beef cattle or grow corn and soy to feed animals on factory farms. Unfortunately. And many people think that switching to grass-fed beef is an environmentally friendly option, but unfortunately, a study from Oxford University found that this is not true. Dr. Tara Garnett from Oxford University, the lead author of Grazed and Confused, concluded that this report concludes that grass-fed livestock are not a climate solution. Grazing livestock are net contributors to the climate problem, as are all livestock. It turns out you can save the same amount of water by skipping 1 gallon of milk or a month's worth of showers. Everyone would prefer that you shower. The same is true with meat. Switching from a hamburger to a veggie burger just once saves as much water as not showering for a whole month. It's the single most effective way we can save water on a daily basis. I know that we're in the Midwest, but I still wanted to include these slides because I feel like it's important because we still have an effect on the rest of the world. And that's why I included this slide as well. A lot of people ask about the water footprint of almonds because there have been articles about how water intensive almond milk is. The New York Times made a great infographic looking at the carbon, land, and water footprints of different types of milk. You can see that cow's milk is far more resource intensive than any of the plant-based milks. So you're saving land, carbon, and water by switching from cow to almond milk. However, if you really want the absolute lowest footprint possible, you might consider switching to oat milk. And a fun fact, oat milk actually self-pollinates, or oats self-pollinate. That's why they are the most environmentally friendly. So all of these antibiotics, pesticides, GMO crops, and water are fed to these 10 billion animals. It goes through their systems and comes out as manure. We'll see what happens to all this waste in the next 2-minute video.
We're looking at a lake of toxic pig feces and urine, the size of 4 football fields. That's because thousands upon thousands of pigs are inside of these buildings. Their waste falls through slats in the concrete floor, and it's flushed directly into this giant open-air cesspool. How many of these kinds of factories are there? In North Carolina alone, there are over 2,000, and the consequences are disastrous.
The waste falls through the floors. It's flushed out into an open pit, like a cesspool. It's easy for a big hog operation to have as much waste as a medium-sized city. Of course, the pit will fill up, so it has to be emptied, and they're emptied by spraying the liquid waste. If you're familiar with a garden sprayer, they're gigantic versions of that. So they're making droplets, fine mists out of this liquid waste, and that can drift downwind into the neighboring communities.
So this is where they spray animal waste on us. This is about 8 feet from my mother's house.
What is it like when the mist is?
It's like, you think it's raining?
Really?
You think it's raining. We don't open the doors of the windows, but the odor still comes in. It takes your breath away.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. Sorry, it's loading. Here we go. Now, you may be wondering how these factory farms get away with spraying toxic waste on communities. The reason is that factory farms are actually exempt from the Clean Air Act, so the EPA doesn't measure or punish factory farms for emitting airborne toxins. Factory farms have actually been documented emitting hydrogen sulfide and ammonia levels 10 times higher than the EPA would allow for the oil and gas industry. But because they're exempt from the law, they're never punished, and local communities suffer as a result. All of this manure also results in tons of water pollution. In fact, runoff from factory farms is the leading cause of water pollution in the US. This runoff destroys ecosystems, kills off all the fish, and makes water unsafe for drinking or swimming. All of the manure runoff has excess nitrogen and phosphorus in it, which algae love. So they grow like crazy, which blocks sunlight and depletes the water of oxygen, causing all other life to die. This process is called eutrophication. The estimated cost of damage mediated by eutrophication in the US alone is $2.2 billion annually. Very destructive. All of the manure runoff from factory farms and fertilizer runoff from farms growing corn and soy in the Midwest run off into the Mississippi River, which feeds into the Gulf of Mexico. In 2017, the runoff created the largest dead zone ever recorded, larger than the state of New Jersey. Now, how is it possible that animal agriculture accounts for about as much greenhouse gases as the entire transportation sector? Does anyone know why? Some people laugh when they hear the reason. That's the hint.
Isn't it because they produce a lot of methane, like gas and things from eating?
Yes, carbon dioxide is, well, I'll just say this. Carbon dioxide is produced from transportation burning fossil fuels, and many of you are familiar with its harmful effects on the environment. And what you are referring to, Hannah, is that cows burp methane, which is 20 times worse for the climate than carbon dioxide in comparison. And cow's manure releases nitrous oxide, which is 300 times worse for climate change than carbon dioxide. So what's coming out of cows is up to 300 times worse than what's coming out of cars. So you are exactly on track. In fact, a new study found that the top 5 meat and dairy producers combined produce more greenhouse gases than ExxonMobil, Shell, or BP. According to our most recent data sourced from Climate Watch, transport emits about 16% of the world's greenhouse gases, influencing climate change. If you add up the emission from livestock manure, soil, crop burning, deforestation, and energy in agriculture and fishing, much of which is connected to factory farming, you end up at about 15.4%. Combine that with fossil fuels required to grow the corn and soy, and factor in all of the deforestation, it meets huge carbon footprint starts to make sense. Climate change also helps infections like COVID-19 spread more easily. Climate-driven extreme weather events cause famine and food shortages. Undernourished people are vulnerable to viral infections. Melting ice and rising sea levels force animals closer to humans, increasing our likelihood of contracting a zoonotic disease. Here you can see a real-world example from India. On the left is a photo of what the land looked like with free-range cattle grazing. Their forest was turning into desert and the soil was blowing away. They consulted with scientists who advised them to stop grazing dairy cattle on the land. In the photo on the right, you can see what the same plot of land looked like once the cattle had been removed. Very dramatic difference. To make matters even worse, Wildlife Services, a secretive division of the USDA with no public oversight, sorry about that pop-up, kills millions of native animals at the request of ranchers. They kill off predators like bears, wolves, and foxes that threaten the livestock. They kill off small mammals like ground squirrels that dig holes that cows could fall into. We're destroying entire ecosystems in order to make them suitable for free-range cattle. Now you can start to see why wildlife populations have plummeted and livestock populations have soared in recent years. You may have heard about regenerative agriculture that focuses on healthier soil and carbon sequestration through no-till farming, crop rotations, keeping plants in the ground, fewer no pesticides and herbicides, less water use, and increasing biodiversity. While it holds some promise, the science so far doesn't support the claims. Because there are no standards, one concern is that large corporations use it to greenwash their practices. Another issue is that although some farms don't use animals, others include livestock. This is problematic since cows can release more methane and nitrous oxide than soil can absorb using regenerative practices, which eliminates the benefits it otherwise has of reducing carbon emissions. Additionally, there's not enough land on the planet to raise enough grass-fed cows to meet current demand. Finally, an anaerobic digester, or AD, works much as a manure pit does, depriving the manure of oxygen so it breaks down with the help of bacteria. The resulting gases produced are 50–80% methane, 20–50% carbon dioxide, and small amounts of other gases. The methane, known as biomethane, to differentiate it from a fossil gas methane from inside the ground, is then used as a renewable fuel. The emission savings can be significant, but this is a partial picture because there are some major problems. For example, you need a lot of manure to compete with the methane yields of energy crops processed in AD and energy crops. Often maize take land out of food production, especially when they're grown intensively. And as a fact, biomethane is better for the climate. Well, as a fuel, biomethane is better for the climate than fossil fuel methane, but to produce enough of it to displace fossil fuel would require far more than can be made via ADs with available feedstocks. And since we're already having environmental problems, you can see the issues there. So not only are ADs greedy, but they also produce their own emissions. Methane leaks, known as fugitive emissions, are inevitable. The problems with animal agriculture cannot be reduced down to greenhouse gas emissions, and neither can the worth of its solutions. Anaerobic digesters may cut emissions from manure, but when used to the benefit of factory farming, they stop being a solution and become a burden instead. And finally, you can follow us. Here is the handles. And then if you have any questions or any resources or recommendations, you can gladly email me. I'd love to help any way I can. And then now it's time for Q&A. Sorry that went a few minutes over. I'd love to answer any questions you may have. Thank you so much for listening.
Absolutely. Oh, I think I'm just checking to make sure no one has any questions anywhere before I ask mine. So I think one, like Jen and I talk about this a lot with the sustainability group, a lot of people don't have good recipes to vegetarian or vegan, food. And I feel like people think they maybe have to get rid of all animal products right away and make a drastic change right away. Do you have like recommendations for like how to make that next step of maybe like Meatless Monday or,
Right. Yeah.
you know what I mean? Oh, perfect.
Yeah, I have a slide on this. Yeah, I've added some additional slides for this. So yeah, for people who want to make smaller changes, because you definitely don't have to make drastic ones. That's a big thing we want to emphasize. But even though if you want to go full vegan after listening to this presentation, great, that's amazing. But if not, start small. That's also great. You know, it's better than not starting anywhere. And some examples include leaving animal-based foods off your plate 1 day a week, or having 1 meal per day. And some recommendations for that I recommend are, looking up your favorite meal and typing in vegan after it and recipe. Like that's really helpful, so like not worrying too much about like finding unique recipes, but like focusing on your favorite comfort foods first might be really helpful for you to like implement and make vegan, because it's pretty easy. It's pretty simple to mix. For example, mac and cheese, you can easily swap with vegan plant-based cheeses. And I have another slide on this too, like what alternative products are out there, because there's plenty of alternative products if you do want to use those. Like Garden, there's Just Egg, Oatly, even Ben & Jerry's has its own vegan ice cream line, so you don't have to reach for the dairy option. But and the other option, and then the other recommendations, it says like just reducing portion sizes, and then even eliminating foods based on negative impacts. So like eliminating beef from your diet because of the huge impact it has. That's a great question.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. I feel like as I'm vegetarian, but like as like a college student, I know it could be hard,
Right.
it's easy to go to like McDonald's or something, but like, making like, because I like beans and rice a lot. That's what I eat all the time.
That's good, right?
But yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing. I don't know if no one's wrote in the chat. Does anyone have any additional questions, or I think you can unmute or raise your hand or.
Oh, and I will give another helpful resource. If you're out to eat and you need to look up vegetarian or vegan foods, go to happycow.com, and they literally will show you, they have like every restaurant in like every city that has every option that you could want plant-based, which is really awesome. And they're really helpful for that. They even have an app, so.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, Jen posted it. Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you, Jen.
I didn't know that existed until right now. I just ended up getting a salad.
Yeah, this helps because you don't have to stick to just a salad. A lot of people feel like they have to stick to just that, but now you really don't, because they're starting to realize there's a demand for this, which is great. And by giving your dollar to this, there's going to be even more of a demand. So these companies are going to want to put out even more products. So you can feel good while you're buying it, and that you aren't hurting animals or the environment at the same time, or your health.
100%. And I totally agree with that. Oh, Jen, I saw you unmuted.
And Columbus is such a good food scene that there are definitely pockets of the city that have more vegan related stuff. So like Town Hall is one that's fun to visit in the short north, and they're just endless options. So it can be really fun to explore all these different new things.
Right. It really is. Yeah, definitely. And don't be afraid to ask too, if you're at a place. I mean, sometimes people aren't super well versed, but usually they'll be able to look it up for you, and they're willing to help you look and see what vegetarian or vegan options they can fix up for you. They're pretty receptive most places now, which is really nice. But yeah, if there's any other questions, I'd love to answer them. If not, I can give this to Mikhala, if that works.
Another aside, I think I've seen a movement where people are moving vegan for health reasons, like especially some of the people later in life are finding that it like helps with inflammation and various other like medical challenges. Once you get to the ages where you start getting diagnosed with stuff, more and more vegan swinging in that regard too, for health reasons.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's a great reason to go vegan. And I recommend pcrm.org. They're really great. They are doctor-based, doctor-backed resource with, plant-based health information and research that's really helpful. It's all fact-checked and everything, all free. And, they have meal plans and all that. But yeah, it's definitely, there's so many reasons to go veg, whether it be for health, environment, or otherwise. I do know someone in my cohort at FFAC, Mary, she's older, and she's done a lot of presentations for other people in her community, other seniors. And that's a big reason a lot of them have wanted to make the change too. So you're definitely right, Jennifer.
Awesome. And Jen put that in the chat if you guys want that link as well. I totally agree. I have some health issues and they recommended me to cut out. This was a long time ago before I even went, that like into conservation and stuff, cut out like dairy and all that. And it's definitely made a difference. It can definitely help. I think in like, it's great to have these options, like this more holistic approach to medicine. I feel like it's kind of like taking a turn with Western medicine. And I feel like we need that. We need them together. You know what I mean? Not just like pharmaceutical medicine. We need to eat healthier and take care of our planet at the same time and ourselves,
100%. And I think a good note to end this on, like, is what I always tell people is focus on one meal at a time. Like just one meal, like every meal's, a chance to make a difference. Like my husband's a lot the same way. He always loved meat and everything. He just recently started he went vegetarian for me, and he's trying to go vegan, but he's not, he's vegetarian. But yeah, it's better than nothing, just every meal is a chance to make a difference. So that's amazing. Thank you so much for doing what you're doing.
Absolutely. And good for him, go, yeah, it's
He did
a
it for
stepping
health
stone.
reasons too, because he had high cholesterol, and the doctor was literally like, yeah, you need to cut things out. That's why. So
yeah. Well, that was great, and I appreciate you sharing definitely about the food. If no one has any other questions, we could of course still wrap back around at the end. I think you said Mikhala is next.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, everyone.
Thank you.
Did I deal with the checkbox correctly? Can everyone hear me and see my screen?
I can hear you, but I cannot see your screen. Is that just me?
No.
Yeah, it seems like it's maybe still loading. I don't know.
Sometimes I hit the wrong window and then I'm just like screen sharing nothing.
Right. Maybe stop share and reshare. Yeah, that was weird. I haven't seen that particular error before.
Oh, there we go.
And now you need to unmute.
How about now?
Perfect.
You're good to go.
I can hear you.
Great.
Cool.
If only they would give the option of start from this current slide. Okay. A lot of this I'm going to skip because it's redundant given how thorough Cassidy was in her presentation. So, hello everyone. I am Mikhala Kaseweter. I am the Campaigns Fellow for the Better Food Foundation. Specifically, most of my work is on the DefaultVeg campaign, which is what I'll be talking about today. Cassidy was very thorough in mentioning the problems with factory farming and with how most animal products are produced today. I will be taking a solutions-oriented approach in proposing DefaultVeg as a very effective tool to reduce harm. So an obvious conclusion you may have already made that we've already touched on is, if animal products are harmful, then what would the alternative be? Well, plant-based meals. Greenhouse gas emissions of plant-based meals are on average 70% lower than the emissions of animal-based meals for all of the reasons that we just heard about for the past half hour. It is, in fact, a very direct causation. I think it goes beyond correlation. If you just look at this bar graph, reducing beef portion size by 25% is about 25% as effective as just making the switch from beef to plant-based. And you can see that dietary changes, such as replacing beef, are, I guess I'll say infinitely, even though obviously it's measurable, infinitely more effective than other sustainability solutions that are often peddled to us, such as recycling. Not to say that recycling isn't important, of course, but if we're looking at the climate crisis as a crisis and asking ourselves, how can we most efficiently, most succinctly draw down emissions? Food systems is the answer. Fortunately, I think it's pretty safe to say that this is no longer just a matter of plant-based foods being available. I think that this has blossomed into a movement. I mean, I've been vegetarian for 11 years, and I just remember what it was like in the 2010s, and that was a far different cultural and landscape than we have today. It's not niche anymore. You can go to most restaurants and there will be a vegan option, and most people now know what it means to be vegan, whereas that was an unfamiliar word a decade ago. Over the last 4 years in particular, plant-based menu items have increased 800%, which is just a massive increase. We've just seen a skyrocketing selection of plant-based foods, and this has truly taken hold in American households. In 2020, 57% of households bought plant-based foods, which is amazing when you consider there is no way that 57% of American households are vegetarian or vegan. That means that everyone is taking part in this. 23% of Americans have recently reduced their meat consumption, including 31% of non-white Americans. So there's an interesting racial aspect to this, which I will touch on more later. Again, this is not just vegetarians, this is not just vegans, this is widespread and tractable. 60% of Gen Z wants to eat more plant-based foods, and 79% of Gen Z is already eating plant-based 1 to 2 times a week. So there is a little bit of a youthful skew to this trend. But again, that said, 40% of households are consuming both plant-based milk and cow's milk, suggesting that most people are flexitarians. Most people are willing to experiment and dabble in plant-based, even if they don't hold on to that as an identity. 98% of consumers who buy plant-based meats are also buying animal-based meats. Now, what's the deal with DefaultVeg? Well, we have found a really interesting bit of behavioral economics research, and we are using that behavioral economics research to reshape food systems. So it's all based on this book called Nudge by Nobel laureate Richard Thaler and Harvard professor Cass Sunstein. They wrote Nudge about the power of defaults in influencing human behavior. So we're all sort of familiar with the idea of a default, even if it's not something that we necessarily devote a lot of cognitive attention to. The default is the option that you end up with if you don't choose something other than the default. The default is what you automatically receive unless you choose otherwise. So for a host of reasons, people have a strong tendency to go along with the status quo. We know this. You will often receive French fries as your side with a meal as a default. When you go to a website, there will be a little dialog box or bar at the bottom asking you to accept cookies. Accepting cookies is the default. If you want to reject the cookies or if you want to customize the cookies, you'll have to do extra work. You'll have to do a bit of exploring and click around and toggle some bars. Printers often default to one-sided printing, though at my college, it defaulted to double-sided as a sustainability initiative. So like they flipped the default specifically to be more sustainable. In coffee shops, cow's milk is the default. That is what you will receive automatically unless you choose otherwise. And organ donation is default no in this country, but not everywhere. So one of the most powerful examples of how defaults work and how we can use them to be more socially responsible is that in Germany, just like in the US, people are by default not organ donors. You have to opt in. You have to choose to sign up. The participation rate there is only 12%, whereas just in the neighboring country of Austria, people by default are organ donors. You would have to opt out and say that you don't want to be, where the participation rate is 99%. So you can really see here the effect of the status quo and the power of defaults in nudging people one way or the other. We are going to apply that to plant-based foods. The idea of plant-based defaults is a simple concept. You give people plant-based automatically with the option to add meat or dairy. The idea of plant-based defaults is flexible because you can institute this in virtually any setting or context, and it is cost effective. I know that vegan food has a nasty reputation as being not fiscally viable, but we find that in a lot of cases it's cost neutral, and sometimes it's even saving people money. This is also a critical solution for racial justice, social justice, religious justice. Serving plant-based foods automatically would eliminate a lot of dietary discrimination, which, again, I know this is not something that most people think of, but it would include everyone because 30 to 50 million Americans are lactose intolerant, and this is something that we do not talk about. That's just a lot of lactose intolerant people, and I don't hear media attention about this. I don't even hear like personal conversations about this. I think that there are a lot of people out there who are lactose intolerant and they don't realize it because we don't have an established narrative around this. We are in fact like a default dairy culture, and so we just wrongfully presume that people can digest lactose. There's also religious considerations because many religions encourage vegetarianism, such as Seventh-day Adventists, and certain religions restrict certain animal products. So famously, halal and kosher diets bar the eating of pork products. There is, of course, the youthful skew that I mentioned earlier, where millennials and Gen Z in particular are interested in eating plant-based foods. So you would be able to attract a younger generation of customer by going default veg. And again, there is a very racialized reality to veganism and to our food systems. Americans of color are actually more likely to be vegan. And again, veganism just has a reputation as being a very white lifestyle and a white movement. And yeah, there's a lot of erasure going on here. Like there's silencing in creating that narrative. But if you are a default veg, then you would be able to include historically marginalized populations who are more likely to be vegan. Default veg is effective. There is research. If you recall, Nudge is written by a Nobel laureate and a Harvard professor. Like, this is hardcore, science-backed, very, very established, very supported by data. I'm just going to show you a couple examples, but in this example, you can see that whereas with a meat default, only 24% of people were eating the veg option. If you flip the default and go default veg, 67% were eating the veg option. This experiment is actually like 3 separate experiments. So this came from a single paper. They did 3 separate experiments at events, like catered group events. Yeah, you can just see the massive increase as indicated by the arrows. The one on the far right is the sum, the total effect, where there is an 81% increase when you flip the default. So 6% of people were choosing veg food with meat default, and 87% were choosing the veg food with default veg. This is effective from a natural resource perspective and from an environment perspective. You can save millions of gallons of water, you can save hundreds of thousands of kilograms of carbon dioxide. And again, we've attached price tags to these because we know that that speaks to people. So if you just change 1,000 lunches to be default veg, you would be saving the equivalent of 240 kilowatts of power from solar panels. Like, you can save money, and in my opinion, more importantly, you can save the Earth's resources. Now, of course, the obvious question becomes, how do you do default veg? How does this happen? It's like, great, this all sounds wonderful, it's effective, we get it. What do I do? Again, the most fundamental idea here is that your base is plant-based and you can add meat or dairy. So if you're looking at a buffet style meal, you would offer meat and dairy at the end of the line so that everyone receives the plant-based foundation, and then just as sort of an afterthought, people can choose meat or dairy. For RSVP meals, like at a wedding, you would say on the invitation that the food will be plant-based by default, and then the guests would have to check a box or otherwise actively select something to indicate that they want to opt in to meat or dairy. And in a restaurant setting, you would offer meat or dairy as add-ons. So in like a Chipotle situation, I suppose, you would have to tell them that you want meat. You would have to tell them what type of meat you want. And what would usually end up happening in real life examples is they would charge you money accordingly. So if you want beef, then maybe that'll be an extra $3, whereas if you want chicken, that'll be an extra $2. But if you're just getting plant-based, then you wouldn't have to pay any extra money because that is the default, and you are specifically choosing to add meat. Yeah, there are a couple different ways that you can achieve default veg in like catered or menued scenarios. So one easy way is to alter the ratios. If you offer a minimum of 2-to-1, plant-based to animal-based, you will create the perception that plant-based is default, even though 2-to-1 isn't that radical. Like, there's still plenty of animal-based options. It's just outweighed. So a University of Cambridge study found that if you increase the ratio from 1-to-3 plant-based, animal-based to an even amount of 2-to-2, that increased the take rate of veg options by 60%. And then a different study found that when 75%, so 3/4, I know I'm mixing my fractions and my percentages here, forgive me for that. But when 3/4 of the options were meat-based, 12% chose veg. When you flip that and make 3/4 vegetarian, then about half were choosing the veg option. There are also sneakier, more subtle ways that you could achieve default veg wins. You could just, by default, serve plant-based desserts, or by default, serve plant-based condiments, or by default, serve plant-based breads. This is really popular in dining hall settings because most people can't tell if a loaf of bread is vegan, or can't tell if a brownie is vegan, or can't tell if the mayo actually has eggs in it, or whether it's vegan mayo. This is pretty menu specific, so I don't know if anybody out there is a restaurateur. I don't know how relevant this will be to your life specifically. But you can see the control menu on the left has one vegan option. No, sorry, 2 vegan options, but they're bookended, right? There's just at the very beginning and at the very bottom, whereas on the right, they are separate. the vegetarian dishes are just kind of cordoned off at the bottom, which actually makes people less likely to order them. You want the options embedded and mixed in to make it seem like they are normal, okay? What we're trying to achieve here is normalization of veg options. Because if people see that there is a vegetarian section, then they might think to themselves, oh, I personally do not identify as vegetarian, therefore I can't or shouldn't order from that section of the menu. It's very much, it's a delineation, a separation. It is othering the idea of being veg, which is discouraging people from being flexitarians or reducitarians, right? We know that people are willing to dabble and experiment with plant-based foods, but when you structure it in a very separate way, they're less likely to. And of course, this is probably common sense, but it's always good to mention it. You want food to sound good. You want food to sound delicious. So you should be labeling them based on taste, texture, and provenance, meaning where they come from, rather than labeling it as vegetarian or vegan or meatless or healthy or low fat. If you call them meat-free sausages, people are not going to be that interested. Whereas if you call them Cumberland spiced sausages, that is more appealing to them. Marketing is important, and how we talk about food is very important if we want them more. Again, as I've talked about weddings and buffets and events and restaurants, you can do something default. You can do a default veg strategy in virtually any food setting, whether you're a business, whether you're a university, whether you're an organization, you're running a conference, you own a restaurant. Which is why our list of adopters is so varied. In the college environment, we have clubs and we have sororities, we have specific departments, we have student governments, Office of Sustainability, Office of the Provost, Student Council. Restaurants are few and far between, honestly, but coffee shops is where things are really taking off. There are way more examples than this, just to be clear. I just didn't want to put all of that onto a slide. Do you want to see 100 different things on a slide? I know I don't. But coffee shops is really where DefaultVeg has taken off in the past couple of years. In fact, BFF is running an entire campaign around it right now. Blue Bottle Coffee made headlines last year for going oat milk default, and Stumptown made headlines earlier this year for going oat milk default. Events and conferences are also an easy way to get DefaultVeg win because it's a discrete fixed event, right? There is a beginning, there is an end. So it's a lot less threatening to people because it feels temporary, but you can still achieve a lot of good. You can still make a difference. It's just easier to get it approved in a lot of cases. And some corporations are actually going DefaultVeg for lots of different reasons, usually sustainability. LinkedIn's San Francisco office went DefaultVeg last year, and New York City's Health and Hospitals turned all of New York City's public hospitals DefaultVeg. In order for this to happen, obviously there are a lot of behind the scenes tasks, knowledge. There's a lot of consultation that has to happen, and we do help with that. So we can come up with menus, we can provide recipes, we can talk about sourcing, because if you are suddenly going to be using a lot of chickpeas and you've never had to buy chickpeas in your life, and now you have to buy like literally tons of them, you might not know how to do that. So we can help source your food, and obviously the marketing and the educational aspects, because you're going to have to sell people on this probably. There will almost certainly be pushback just because a lot of people are threatened by the emergence of plant-based diets. And we can also come up with impact calculations so that you know just how many gallons of water you're saving or just how many kilograms of carbon dioxide you're saving. So in the case of New York City's public hospitals, as I mentioned, they are serving 850,000 in plant-based meals per year, now that they've gone default veg. And in the case of the hospitals, because this is a massive system with just a huge food service network, we had to do a lot of chef training, essentially, because they didn't feel comfortable. They didn't feel like they had enough expertise in cooking plant-based meals. So we came up with a menu for them. Here are some of the dishes that we came up with. And then we helped train them so that they felt qualified to cook these meals, not just to cook them in general, but to cook them well, to cook them deliciously. Because again, we want people to realize that plant-based food can taste good. We don't just want to force feed people vegan meals and then have them hate it. That doesn't help anyone. That doesn't help the cause. That doesn't help the planet. We're trying to make people enjoy plant-based food, because that is how the movement grows. We have flowcharts for you in case you're a flowchart person. This would help with a conference. We have all sorts of handy little infographics and resource guides. And here's a sample menu and a sample emissions estimate. I will stop sharing my screen now.
Great, thank you. That's awesome. I love all those meals. They all sounded good to me. All the little meals for the New York City. I just wanted to check. A couple of people mentioned they love the idea. Julia loved the idea of setting up a buffet for family gatherings with veggies up front. Geraldine said, great idea to have a checkbox on RSVP to add meat instead of the current indicating you want vegetarian. And I agree with that, definitely. Because it's always like chicken or fish, and then at the bottom it'll say, oh, if you're vegetarian, check, which flipping it is a really good idea. I never thought about something like that.
There are lots of tiny ways to achieve change. You just have to see an opportunity and just whoop.
Definitely. One of my things I had a question about, I guess, if anyone else didn't have a question, I wanted to give the floor to them before. I don't see any hands or messages. I guess I'll ask it, and if someone. So I moved from Washington State, so seeing something in Oregon that was pretty interesting. That's really good for them. Washington is very vegan vegetarian. Coming here is a definite change. To Columbus. So it's one of those things where we've noticed a lot of our students feel uncomfortable confronting their families about vegan or vegetarian options. And I think you did bring up a good point of putting the veggies first and then the meat. Do you have any advice for maybe students confronting, because it's hard, like if you're under 18, you can't go out maybe and buy your own oat milk or something like that. Is there any advice you have for them? Or
is the hypothetical scenario that people are living with their parents and they want to go veg in some way?
Or advice to talking to their family maybe about it. I know it's tough.
I would honestly, you know your family better than I do. That's my disclaimer. You know what will sell better than I do, but my approach is usually just to be thorough in saying, there are religious reasons to do this. There are health reasons to do this. There are sustainability reasons to do this. I try to be holistic in the way that I sell it, because I know that a lot of people are doing it for different reasons. Just because I'm doing it for the animals doesn't mean that anybody else gives crap about the animals. So I want to make sure to mention low saturated fat, low cholesterol. I want to cover all my bases, because I know that different things have traction with different people.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we run into, right, Jen? I think you unmuted.
I did. For me, I ended up down this path because of my brother-in-law. He and his wife were doing this, and then because of their influence at holidays and meals, they would bring their own food, and they started kind of permeating it through their actions. And then eventually my husband and I started in 2018, my parents were very confused. By 2019, my mom's still hosting parties for me with meat, and I'm shaking my head at her like, what are you doing? And then by 2021, my mom's doing vegan January. So it took about 4 years, but my parents went to flexitarian and predominantly vegetarian, you know, after watching us constantly do it.
That's honestly like really heartening. Yeah. So just full disclosure, I'm from Indiana and I spent my first 24 years of life in Indiana. So like hard relate to how animal product heavy the Midwest is, and like parental confusion, and also like my church community was like, wait, what? Yeah, if you are gentle about it, I think that's also a really important point, because nobody likes the pushy vegan. Like, that is a stereotype, and with that comes a lot of room for disaster. But if you're gentle about it and say, like, this is what I've chosen for myself, I am choosing to follow what I think is right, like I am pursuing my own virtue, I think as long as you individualizing it while providing context about how like the problems are systemic or whatever. But as long as I found a lot of positive reactions to, this is my body, this is what I think is right, I am eating this, I am not making you eat this, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, definitely. My mom was, my mom struggled. She ate a lot of meat and things like that. And then she actually went through a lot of health problems, and is still going through a lot of health problems, and went vegan because of that, and has felt a lot better. And that's one thing I like to tell people, especially because I feel like a lot of people do see vegetarian vegans as us as like pushy, and it's not necessarily the case. It's more like, no, you know, I understand you want to eat your steak or whatever, but maybe like for breakfast, if you're gonna have steak for dinner, eat like something like a yogurt, or like if you want to do vegetarian yogurt, or they have the tofu scrambles now, like just one thing, one tiny little thing, and then it slowly evolves over time where you're not even craving that anymore, you know. So it's definitely good to hear that everyone's experience has been sort of that with their family. I feel like our college students feel a little lost when they're the first one, like breaking that. They're like, you know what? I'm not doing this anymore. I'm
It's
trying
hard to
something.
be the pioneer. It really is.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially with the community college, you know, we only see them for 2 years, and we want to help them as much as we can as they move forward to the other colleges to give them the information, you know. But
Yeah, I thought I would say a little bit about my journey too. Just to back it up, yeah, like I grew up, I didn't want to eat meat at all, but the same way, Jen, I like relate to that. I didn't want to eat animal products, like I didn't like them really, you know. But my parents were like, "Oh, you have to, because that's for health reasons," you know, like all the stereotypes and all that. And then on top of that, they bought only humane, supposedly, products. You know, they fell for all the marketing deception and everything. And they were convinced that they were paying more and getting humanely murdered meat, etc., which is, you know, they just didn't understand when I would try to tell them that I would prefer not to, you know, eat that at all. So, you know, so when I left the house, when I became 18, that's when I, like, it was like, okay, I'm an adult now, like I'm vegan. Like, well, I was vegetarian, and then I didn't really know about the egg and dairy industries, but as soon as I found out about them, then I went vegan. But that was my kind of journey. But yeah, it's a very common thing for young people, I feel like, to go through. So, you know, having a support network, definitely important. I think that's good. Your students have you to talk to, it sounds like, Hannah.
It's great to hear everyone's journey. I'm glad we're all on the same path. I don't see any other questions. Jen, did you have any, or anyone else? You're welcome to unmute and ask. Or
Right. I think in the beginning, even like personally, I had trouble wrapping my head around like these routines and these natural motions you go through, where it's like, okay, when I go to Wendy's, I buy chicken nuggets, you know, and it's like, wait a minute. and just moving to a new default, like you talked about, was a little trippy at first. Even looking in your freezer, it's like, well, what goes in my freezer now? Like, what do I put there? So as you know more people who go on that journey and can help show you the way, or whether you're modeling that behavior for other people in your life, it's like once they see how this can be done, it really comes to life. Plus, to your guys' point, there's so many more resources today than there were even a decade ago, that it's so obtainable and more mainstream. It's fantastic. So great presentations, really. I learned a lot, and thank you so much for reaching out to us and offering to share all this wonderful information with us today.
Thank
You're
you so
welcome.
much. Sorry.
Thank you, and you're welcome.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. I don't see any other questions. So I know they said, or Cassidy mentioned, you can email them. They posted the stuff. This is recorded and will be uploaded as well. So if you have to go back and scroll through, you can, of course. But yeah, I have no other questions.
Nice to meet y'all.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having me as well. Take care, everyone.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.